The trail would take me to one of Craig Whyte's old pals, Aidan Earley, a twice bankrupted born-again Christian. There are some serious questions that Rangers fans might want put to Mr. Earley, and that's exactly what I'm going to do now. Well, to be fair to Aidan Earley, he just spent 20 minutes at the door with me, and in a nutshell, he categorically denies doing anything wrong. But every time I asked him, and I asked him maybe 5, 6 or 7 times, tell me where the money is. Just put the Rangers fans at ease, put me at ease, and tell me where the money is. If you're saying you've done nothing wrong, tell me where the money is. And he just would not tell me. Aidan Earley later provided a statement.
The 250k that you refer to did not come from Rangers, but because of Craig's involvement with RFC, it was conceded that Rangers could have an interest. It is none of anyone's business how the money was deployed. I did not receive a penny, nor did Craig. In the politest possible way, I would very much like never to hear from you again in the context of Rangers.
We may never know where that money went. And in an email, Craig Whyte told us,
I am not aware of any payment being made to Banstead.
Well, from what I could gather, it was his own money from his own businesses, because he does have businesses, and I thought, OK, this guy's putting up money up front from his own labours.
And did it worry you that he wouldn't tell us exactly how he had made his money? He had businesses, yes, but he wouldn't exactly say where these so-called millions were coming from.
Again, smoke and mirrors, using choice phrases to reassure us without actually telling us where his money came from, but just giving you enough of a hint to think it was all legal and above board.
Rangers fans were still giving Craig Whyte the benefit of the doubt, until, that is, the revelation that he'd mortgaged off 3 years' season ticket money to fund the club. Finance firm Ticketus, based here at the Old Bailey in London, were flung into the spotlight over what appeared to be a very questionable business decision indeed. This, to Rangers fans, was the ultimate act of selling the jerseys. Craig Whyte didn't just mislead fans about where the money to fund the purchase came from, he'd sliced off a huge chunk of future revenue, potentially cutting off the lifeline of the club.
The public reaction to Craig Whyte, it definitely was going to change when he was going to do something at the club, and I got that totally. So selling jerseys, coming out and being proved to be a blatant liar, saying that it was his money that took out the loan, was huge.
At the end of the day, what he's done is stolen my money and thousands of other Rangers fans' money for the next 4 years with their season ticket books.
Even the most blinkered Rangers fan who wanted to believe in Craig Whyte, the White Knight, the man with wealth off the radar, even that group of Rangers fans had to concede really bad news is unfolding for us.
The bad news came on Valentine's Day.
OK, what we've done today was the most practical way forward to safeguard the long-term survival of Rangers, which is what we're all about, and prevent the possible closure of the club. We hope to continue discussions with HMRC and have practical proposals in place. I've spoken to the manager, the staff and sporting representatives this afternoon, and I've outlined the position. This is a difficult day for Rangers, but we'll emerge as a fitter and stronger club for this. Thank you very much.
It's sad, shocking, makes me angry, you know, because it is 140 years of history, Scottish history, institution, one of the biggest names in football on the planet, and we're reduced to this.
Craig was not the White Knight that Rangers fans had hoped for, plunging the club into administration amidst a trail of debt. The fate of the club was now put into the hands of the administrators, and we're about to reveal what every Rangers fan needs to know about Duff and Phelps.
This administration will be carried out under the most rigorous public scrutiny, and it will be conducted to the highest professional standards.
Craig Whyte had been determined to have his choice of administrator appointed. But given what we know about him, should that have raised alarm bells? Well, remember David Greer, the guy who helped Whyte buy Rangers? He's a senior partner at Duff & Phelps, which used to be called MCR. They were on the defence almost immediately.
It's not unusual, in my view, but...
I mean, the reality...
Duff & Phelps say Greer only played a limited role in the takeover. But here he is, side by side with Whyte, on the day that he took up the reins at Ibrox. I wanted to ask our insolvency expert how important it was for a company to have clean hands before they take up an appointment.
No insolvency practitioner should ever accept an appointment in circumstances where there is a conflict of interest or even could be seen to be a conflict of interest.
What is the test?
Of utmost honesty, utmost professionalism, utmost good faith, utmost integrity.
Hang on a minute. Duff & Phelps' man David Greer had been involved with Whyte's takeover. So I wanted to know whether that involvement went as far as helping to put together or even just having knowledge of the Ticketus transaction. Let's put it simply. If you were owed money by Rangers, or if you are a Rangers fan, would you put your trust in a company of administrators who were involved in the very deal that put your club's future on the line? I asked them. In a briefing, Paul Clark told me how he knew nothing about how Ticketus had funded the deal until 4 months after Whyte had bought the club. Then, to double check, I phoned David Greer, who said he'd only found out about the Ticketus deal in August. The BBC's been given a series of emails involving David Greer and the Ticketus deal, which expose his initial claim to know nothing about the transaction as not quite true. This is an email from Gary Withy to Craig Whyte and David Greer, sent on the 19th of April 2011, 2 weeks before the deal is completed. It is entitled Ticketus Draft and concerns the completion of the takeover. Note the statement about when Whyte's company takes control.
The assignation documents will be released by the bank and the Ticketus agreements will become unconditional.
Well, on the face of it, this email seems to suggest that David Greer knew about the Ticketus arrangement, and therefore, in those circumstances, given that he was a partner of Duff & Phelps, I'm surprised that that involvement wasn't firstly disclosed, and secondly doesn't give rise to the sort of conflict of interest that I would have expected would have precluded Duff & Phelps from accepting the appointments as administrators.
But there's more. Duff & Phelps have launched a legal action at the High Court in London, claiming Craig Whyte and his lawyers Collier Bristow engaged in a conspiracy to defraud the club of £25 million. Their case is based on a claim that Craig Whyte and Gary Withy deliberately misled the Rangers Independent Committee at a meeting on the 24th of April, less than 2 weeks before the deal was signed. The court papers state that Whyte and Withy must have known that their offer was a false representation, or, in layman's terms, fraudulent, because they knew that the money for the transaction was not coming from Craig Whyte's personal wealth, it was coming from Ticketus. So Duff & Phelps say that Whyte's team
took no steps to rectify the situation and allowed the committee to proceed to consider the merits of the takeover.
We've obtained the minutes from that very meeting on the 24th of April. Take a close look at who was there alongside Whyte and Withy. None other than David Greer. As the emails have shown, Greer appeared to know how the deal was being funded and therefore also took no steps to rectify the situation. Maybe Duff & Phelps are going to sue themselves next.
So this suggests that David Greer was in attendance at the very meeting in relation to which his partners are now taking legal action, which, if true, is one of the starkest conflicts of interest I've ever seen.
It was time to call Duff & Phelps. Their PR man said that, despite what they told me previously, they did know about a Ticketus deal, but not the Ticketus deal that was used to buy the club. So last Friday, David Greer and Paul Clark were coming to be interviewed to tell me how wrong I was. We were all set. Then I got a call from the PR man.
So here I am, and here I am at the BBC, half an hour after our scheduled start time for our interview. We've gone and got a crew for the day because you phoned me up first thing at 8 o'clock this morning, and told me that you would bring your guys in to do an interview. They had nothing to hide, and they were going to tell me, the BBC, and all the thousands of Rangers fans why they've got nothing to worry about their continued position as administrators. So here I am, and here I am, waiting for you. Do you know what that looks like, Ramsey? So you're only prepared to talk to us off the record. They're in charge of the future of one of Scotland's greatest institutions, right? We have extremely serious allegations which relate to their integrity and their continued position as administrators of Rangers, and all you can offer is an off-the-record briefing. Ramsey, that is not good enough. Ramsey, look, we're going around in circles, but I trust that you will have a go with your clients over the next hour to see whether they might, in fact, since they're here, be prepared to come and sit down with me and explain to Scotland and Rangers what they've been up to.
So maybe they would come. Good. Because I didn't just believe that Greer knew about the Ticketus deal, I had evidence which showed that he was involved in sending them an invoice. In these emails, he's been asked to raise an invoice to Ticketus. Greer replies,
"We'll arrange to get the invoice to you ASAP."
So he's arranging invoices in June for a deal he says he knows nothing about till August.
If the conflict of interest is as it appears to be, then I would expect Duff and Phelps to stand down as administrators or to be replaced forcibly by some other practitioner.
They didn't come. But David Greer provided this statement.
"I categorically deny that at the time of the Craig Whyte takeover of Rangers, I had any knowledge that funds from Ticketus were being used to acquire the club. However, we were party to discussions regarding Ticketus as a recognised source of short-term working capital. Material information was withheld to us."
In a separate statement, Paul Clark said,
"I thought that MCR became aware of the full scale of Ticketus funding in July or August. I gave an honest answer to the best of my recollection, as I'd not been closely involved in the Rangers takeover work at the time. There is a world of difference between knowing that Ticketus was a potential source of working capital funding for the club and knowing that funding from ticket sales had effectively been used to purchase the club."
Our evidence paints a murky picture of a tax scheme which lined the pockets of players and directors with millions of tax-free pounds. Sir David Murray failed to safeguard the future of Rangers. His successor, Craig Whyte, brought shame on its history. Duff and Phelps were supposed to be the men who saved the jerseys, but they were part of the cabal who sold them. Charles Green is the next man who has promised to save the club. But Rangers' future is as uncertain now as it's ever been.
For myself and thousands of other fans all across the planet, I mean, they're watching the death of a giant here.
And some of the content of that documentary will be discussed on Newsnight Scotland on BBC Two Scotland at 11 o'clock.
Ex-chairman John McClelland, £200,000 over 5 years. Ex-finance director Douglas Odom, £120,000 over 3 years. Ex-chief executive Martin Bain receives £100,000 loan in 2003. Total payments over 5 years, £250,000. Ex-director Campbell Ogilvie, £95,000 over 5 years.
The evidence we've seen reveals who was benefiting and by how much, but was it legal? Sir David Murray thinks so.
We believe we had a legitimate scheme. We never hid the fact, and we believe it was set up. It was non-contractual, it was discretionary, so we believe we've worked the rules.
For it to be legal, the payments have to be genuine loans and made at the discretion of the offshore trusts. This means the recipients cannot expect the money as part of their regular salary, and neither Rangers nor the Murray Group should have any say over who gets the money or when. In a letter to HMRC in 2008, the Murray Group insisted they were playing by the rules.
There is no trigger for the chain of events that led to an employee being told that they can apply for a loan from the trust. The company has no control over the funds in the trust.
Our evidence suggests Rangers were not playing by the rules. Let's look at two examples. When Ronald Vaterus was negotiating his contract in 2005, his agent questioned the tax scheme. He was told by the club using the trust was
in the interests of Ronald, as it enables him to receive funds tax-free. I can confirm that we will not pay these amounts to Ronald unless they are made through the use of the remuneration trust.
So, not only were the payments not discretionary, but the company insisted this was the only way he would get the money.
Ronald Vaterus, 2 trust payments totalling £510,000.
Then there's the case of Sasa Papach. In November 2008, the finance controller at Rangers noted a drop in Papach's weekly salary and queried this with a colleague.
Note apparent drop in weekly and no appearances, if I'm correct. Is there a remuneration trust on the side?
The reply came simply,
yes.
So it seems that tax-free trust payments were being regularly used as a substitute for salary. And that's why HMRC is gunning for Rangers. The case against Rangers has yet to be decided by a tribunal. They could face a charge of more than £50 million. They could be cleared. But whatever the result, many Scottish football fans believe that Rangers derived from this scheme an unfair financial advantage over its rivals for almost a decade. During these 10 seasons, Rangers won 13 trophies. But some of those could be at risk if Rangers are found to have lied to the Scottish Premier League about how they were paying their players. Once again, our investigation could provide some vital clues. Clubs must declare every penny a player earns from playing football. SFA Rule 12.3 states,
all payments, whether made by the club or otherwise, must be fully recorded within the relevant written agreement.
The charge against Rangers is that they flouted this rule by declaring the players' official salaries and having secret or side contracts with players, promising them tax-free cash from the EBT scheme. This has been strongly denied by the man whose company implemented the tax scheme at Rangers.
There's categorically no 2 contracts running at Rangers.
But evidence to be exposed tonight for the first time casts serious doubt on that claim. According to documents seen by the BBC, no fewer than 53 players and staff had side letters, giving undertakings to fund their sub-trusts with cash. We can reveal the 2 top-earning side letter recipients were
Barry Ferguson, £2.5 million over 5 years. Stefan Kloss, £2.5 million over 6 years.
These were payments agreed on top of their normal salaries and not declared to the SFA. But it wasn't just players who had side letters.
Alec McLeish, £1.7 million over 5 years. Paul Le Guen, £200,000 over 1 year.
We asked everyone in the EBT scheme featured in this programme about their use of the trust. None would tell us anything about their EBTs, except one director, who we'll come to in a moment. We also asked Sir David Murray, who said the scheme had been legitimate and was known to HMRC and the SFA. The SPL is investigating the issue of side contracts at Rangers. One person they might want to talk to is just down the corridor at Hampden, President of the Scottish Football Association. Remember Campbell Ogilvie? He would know about the EBT scheme and admitted that he got £95,000 from it. But what did he know about side contracts? Mr. Ogilvie declined to be interviewed, But in a statement, he said,
I was not aware of which players received EBTs, and having been advised that the scheme was being operated in accordance with the regulations, I therefore did not raise any aspect of this with the Scottish FA.
The case against Rangers is not just that they could have broken tax law, it's that they were using the scheme to pay players that they would otherwise have been unable to afford. Whether the tax case finds against the club is yet to be decided, and it's certain the football authorities will be watching this programme carefully. But the fans, they're watching their club collapse around them.
All right, Sammy. Well, what was the score?
Nothing each. Didn't go out with the bang we wanted, but there you go. The crowd was still behind the team, you know, especially towards the end there, but I think the realisation's done, you know, is this going to be the last time we see Glasgow Rangers at Ibrox?
Sammy believed Sir David Murray when he said he would always look after the best interests of the club. Now Sammy wants answers.
Why did they let it go ahead? Because it's crippled Glasgow Rangers in every manner. Champions League football, possibly been liquidated. I would ask him, if you knew this was going to come, why did you do it? Why didn't you just play with the rules?
To answer those questions, we have to go back in time and try to understand what drives Sir David Murray. At the height of his success, he was one of Scotland's richest and most powerful men. He rubbed shoulders with Britain's most influential people, from Scotland's First Minister to the future Prime Minister. Made a Knight of the Realm in 2007, he boasted a personal fortune of £720 million. But if I can find out what drove him to be such a success, maybe I can find out where it all went wrong. I started by going to meet someone who knew the young David Murray as he was just starting out.
He's got a very unusual range of business skills. He's a very good trader. He can deal successfully off the seat of his pants and make money that way. But he's also a very careful, clear thinker.
David would really like to see you again. And maybe I was in a mood to say, well, that's the past. He was obviously very bright. He was very quick. He was the kind of guy who could buy something today for £1 and sell it tomorrow for £1.30, then move on to the next deal. But the other thing he had, and I saw this on several occasions while I knew him, was that he had vision, he could, and had the patience to develop something on a much bigger scale.
Aged just 25, Murray, who had been a keen rugby player, was involved in a tragic road accident, losing both of his legs.
It seemed to me the accident kind of galvanised him into wanting to make a success of his business life. I think he would always have wanted to make it. It seemed to be a catalyst to make a success. But I think most other people would, on occasions, have dropped their guard, have said, it's hellish not being able to walk, it's awful, and he never did that.
When do we hope to ship to Cairo?
Well, we reckon that we should be able to ship towards the end of this week, beginning of next week, all things being equal.
By the mid-1970s, he had marked himself out as the #1 metals trader in Britain. But he would soon set his sights on targets much more glamorous.
I remember, you may think it's a very silly story, but he told me about some metals convention he'd been to in Monaco, a metals convention, and he told me about meeting Joanna Lumley there. Joanna Lumley is in her 60s, but she would have been a lovely 25-year-old then, and he told me that he had a crack at her. I mean, I think he lost. He was honest enough to say it wasn't. But the idea of a 26-year-old Scottish metal trader with no legs having a crack at Joanna Lumley, it tells you what a confident, assured guy he was. So, and honest that he said, and it didn't work. She rebuffed him. That's his story.
Maybe a metals trader was not the kind of title he needed to woo the likes of Joanna Lumley. He needed something else. It was time to move up to the big league, and that meant buying a football club, and not just any football club. In 1988, David Murray decided he wanted Rangers. He was no longer just a metal trader. He was now the owner of one of the most important institutions in Scotland. But this audacious move could hold a clue for what was to come, because it wasn't his own money that he put on the line. In a single phone call to the Bank of Scotland, he borrowed the £6 million he needed to buy the Ibrox club and changed his status in the world and Rangers' place in history.
We didn't expect what was coming, you know, with David Murray and the Souness revolution, and it was just phenomenal when that kicked off.
Rangers have won the Premier Division Championship as a final whistle goes.
It was like we could get anyone we wanted without, you know, the top players in Europe or wherever. We could get them. Money was no object. And to see that kind of talent at Ibrox was just something else, you know, it was class.
Murray was a heralded figure, a euphoric figure. I remember banners at Ibrox, the Royal Bank of Murray, and it was great. The Rangers fans revelled in this wealth he lavished on the club, and the famous phrase, for every £5 Celtic spend, we'll spend a tenner.
To me, it was a godsend. That was just fabulous. That was some of the greatest times of my life as a supporter of the Rangers Football Club. Fantastic, you know, and no one could touch us, no one could get near us.
Everything about his relationship with Rangers in that first decade was so sweet for him, so ego-nourishing, made him feel a big man, a real player in industry and in society and in sport, and it was like a perfect marriage for him.
So David Murray had what he wanted, Rangers had what they wanted, and the fans were in blue heaven. But how much of this success was built on solid foundations? This is Roger Isaacs. He's one of the UK's leading forensic accountants and insolvency experts. And we've asked him to help us analyse David Murray's business empire and how its fortunes can be related to Rangers.
So if you look at the accounts for Murray International Holdings for the year to 31st of January 1999, it's got net debt at the start of the year of £69 million. At the end of the year, £57 million. It then embarks on a period of rapid expansion where it borrows to acquire assets and properties. That borrowing is funded by the bank.
The Bank of Scotland was very keen to grow its corporate lending book. It almost reached the stage where the bank seemed to believe that David Murray could walk on water. You know, they would lend money for almost anything that he seemed to want it for.
Rangers were coming good on the pitch again and had just won the first of 3 titles in a row. But that was hiding the true financial picture lurking in Murray's accounts.
And there it is, Rangers!
Having looked at these accounts, what was your opinion on the scale of the growth of the debt over the decades?
Well, it's easy to judge with the benefit of hindsight. The question is, when does responsible risk-taking become reckless gambling? But there's no doubt that by borrowing to the extent that this group borrowed, the group was embarking on a strategy which by any definition was high risk.
But Murray thought the high risks were worth taking.
You know, if you don't buy a ticket, you can never win a prize. And what far too many people do is go through their life never taking chances.
In Rangers' case, that was an expensive ticket. In 2004, they owed the bank more than £70 million.
How could a club like Rangers, within the financial constraints of the SPL, possibly cope with that amount of net debt? So it became obvious to me that something was going badly wrong in the running of Rangers. And my final red card issued by Sir David Murray to me was when, around about 04, 05, I can't remember when it was, but I accused him of doing financial vandalism to Rangers. My editor phoned me up and said, look, David Murray's complaining about you fairly vehemently. He loved throwing his weight around, and he had considerable weight, considerable clout. Chairman of Rangers. You could argue one of the biggest, most influential people in Scottish society is the chairman of Rangers.
Spears was banished by Murray, but his words would prove prophetic. Rangers were on the ropes and needed a major cash injection. Sir David turned to the public to raise £50 million, but it raised only £1 million. So what about the rest?
Any other amounts of money above that, the Rangers club will be supported by the Murray Group, because the Murray Group basically indirectly owns the shares in Rangers, and it's our job to fund and support the club.
So Murray says that his company would always ride to the rescue of Rangers. But where does Murray Group's money come from?
It looks as if the majority of that 50 million came from one of the Murray Group companies, which in turn borrowed that money from the bank. The money then flowed into Rangers and was used to repay the bank. So from what I can see, the bank lent the money with one hand and took it back with the other.
We've asked you to look at the accounts of Rangers and Murray since 1999. So David Murray has always said that he was a benefactor to this club. Have you found any evidence which shows how much money he personally has invested in Rangers?
No, all the evidence I've seen suggests that the money that's been invested in Rangers has come directly or indirectly from the bank.
But what happens to Rangers when the banks stop lending? After the crash, Lloyds bought HBOS, Murray's bankers, and Lloyds was in for a shock.
They were horrified. They were absolutely horrified because they'd been hoodwinked, I believe, by the board of HBOS led by Lord Stevenson. Andy Hornby had essentially duped them, had not revealed the true extent of the exposure to toxic assets, including the Murray ones. So they bought the bank under false pretenses. And when they did finally have full sight of the balance sheet from January 2009 onwards, they were absolutely appalled. And they realised they bought a complete basket case.
So how much trouble was Sir David Murray now in?
So if you look at the accounts to the year to June 2009, the net debt's increased to just under £1 billion at 942 million.
The bank suddenly was no longer Sir David's best friend and now took a firm grip of his failing empire. High on the bank's list was Rangers.
Just one last question, Walter. We've talked about this all day. Is what's happening in the boardroom or not happening in the boardroom affecting the dressing room?
There are things that are out with, everyone's control. David Murray has been fantastic for Rangers over his 20 years. He's had to step away and, now the bank have taken over the running of the club.
Sir David Murray had gone from metals trader to one of the most powerful men in Scotland, who counted the country's establishment club as his calling card. But his empire was on its knees. The Rangers fans had had enough, and the bank was calling the shots. Sir David Murray. His risk-taking and ambition resulted in his business empire running up debts of almost £1 billion. He was no longer able to turn to the bank to fund Rangers' excesses. Under pressure to sell, Sir David Murray left Rangers hopelessly exposed and easy prey for the sharks that were circling. And so began the next chapter in the downfall of a giant, as the for sale signs went up at Ibrox.
If somebody wants to come in and do a better job than me and wants to take a serious interest, I'm happy to talk to them.
That's going to take serious money, of course, as well, isn't
No, I don't think it's about money. I would be reasonable to deal with if I thought it was in the best interest of the club.
Enter Cockney football fixer Andrew Ellis. He thought he knew the very man to save Rangers.
I was introduced to Craig as a guy who was reportedly very, very wealthy. He was a Rangers fan. We got on, we went out, we socialised, and we sort of became friends. He said, well, I want to do it. I'm desperate to do the Rangers deal. He said, me and my family, we're Scottish. I looked at it, I thought it makes sense.
But there was another reason for Ellis's confidence. Whyte apparently claimed there was a super-rich investor.
This is one of the reasons that I switched to run with Craig, was Prince Albert of Monaco was going to be Craig's investor.
Prince Albert of Monaco was going to invest into Rangers. That's what Craig Whyte told you?
Yeah. We sat there, we talked about it, and I said, look, you've got to be very careful about that name. He said, because he doesn't want to be involved, doesn't want to be named to it, just keeping the name very, very quiet, he will invest. So I said, you sure? He said, look, I see him every weekend in Monaco. He said he's excited about getting involved.
Craig Whyte said Ellis's claims are nonsense, so we called Prince Albert's office. His spokeswoman went away to check and, slightly puzzled, said this.
His Royal Highness doesn't know Mr. Craig Whyte. His Royal Highness has never had the intention to invest in this club, Rangers FC.
Should you have done more? Check out this guy.
I don't see what more I could have done. I'm not a private investigator. I'm not a solicitor. You know, I've been told the funds are available.
While David Murray's motivation to own Rangers might have been a place in Scotland's high society, what was Craig Whyte's? Well, he was paraded as a Motherwell-born billionaire and a big Rangers fan. But dig a little deeper, and he was a venture capitalist with a history of asset stripping. But at the time, most, including the mainstream media, did not bother to look past the surface. On the 6th of May, Craig Whyte walked into Ibrox to a hero's welcome. The deal had cost him £18 million, which was to clear the club's existing bank debt.
The Rangers fans were right into the arrival of Craig Whyte, partly because I dare say they'd been misled a bit by the press. And the Record and other papers routinely referred to Craig Whyte as being a billionaire. There's a story that you can find if you click on the internet. You'll find, you know, billionaire Craig Whyte is going to do this and going to do that, and he's going to provide a cache of money for Rangers managers to invest in players. I mean, absolutely preposterous stuff. Uncritical, gullible stuff.
Craig Whyte has been exposed in the media before, but tonight we can tell you even more about how he should never have been able to get his hands on Rangers in the first place. This is the key document, a proof of funds letter that formed the basis of the deal. It states that a UK financial institution can confirm that Whyte's company,
Liberty Capital Limited, has available to it up to £33 million for the acquisition of RFC.
And that's it. No proof. It doesn't say where the money's coming from or even what the financial institution is. Seems a bit vague. And I'm not the only one who thinks this. David Roberts from London solicitors Allswang had originally been lined up by Ellis to broker the deal.
Initially, there was just an email that was suggested would be sent, the genesis of which is the basis of that letter. Blind Freddie would realise that that's not going to be acceptable. Show us the letter that underpins your proof of funds. And we weren't given access to the letter. There was total refusal. We weren't even given the name of the institution.
Despite Whyte's reluctance to tell anybody, we can reveal the identity of that institution, Merchant House Group. Why was he so keen to keep them a secret? Maybe because he was on the board of the company. But what chance in reality would this company have had of raising the £33 million required for the takeover? Almost certainly none, it seems. Its shares were suspended last month by the stock exchange over fears it was running out of working capital. So we asked Craig Whyte and his now ex-lawyer Gary Withey about the proof of funds letter. Mr. Whyte said,
"The proof of funds letter provided reflected my ability to provide funds from both my own and third-party resources."
Mr. Withey, who wrote the letter, said,
The term proof of funds is a technical term, and this was only a comfort letter, given after my previous firm, Collier Bristow, had itself received comfort from Merchant House Group that Mr. Whyte had readily realisable assets in excess of £33 million.
But if the guy who wrote it says it's not even a real proof of funds letter, how come it was good enough for someone as famously shrewd as Sir David Murray?
I said I would only sell it who I thought was in the best interest of the club. And the information I had at the time, I think I did so, but as it's materialised thereafter, I was duped. And I think the shareholders were, the media were, and information that's come out since has proven that it was a mistake that I made. And I accept my responsibility, and I got it wrong.
I've been very critical of David Murray for years, but I believe him. I think he was duped. He was duped partly, I think, because he was desperate. He wanted rid of Rangers. He was fed up with it. He'd long since given up the family dynasty idea. I take what David Murray says at face value. I think he was duped by Whyte.
David Murray's not the sort of person to be duped by anyone. I think David would have spotted him a mile off. So yes, the answer is, it is surprising that he didn't see Craig Whyte coming. On the other hand, it may have been such a flea bite in relation to the totality of his situation. He just said, thank God somebody's paying 18 million to the bank. I can close the book and move on.
Did Sir David Murray do enough to preserve the club's 140-year timeline before he walked away? For the next part of our investigation, it's back to the data room. We've obtained more than 100 leaked emails that went between Craig Whyte, his takeover team and the Murray Group. They give a fascinating insight into the takeover negotiations, but they also provide some real clues about the men who sold the jerseys. It's time to introduce a new character, David Greer. Greer was employed by Whyte to help smooth the transaction, and that meant negotiating with the Murray Group.
If I move on from Rangers, I will leave it in the hands of people that I think have got the best into the club.
But was Sir David so keen to sell the club that he was willing to abandon the notion of due diligence and give a prospective buyer a helping hand? In this email from Whyte to Greer, it looks as if their team is given inside information from Murray Group's Mike McGill about how to get the Rangers board on side, but Whyte's got no intention of sticking to his promises.
I have forwarded the attached working capital projections to Mike McGill. This is not the plan we are going to work to, as it is clearly not sustainable, but according to Mike, it is what the independent committee expect to see.
So David Murray told the BBC that Mr McGill
discharged his role as finance director in a perfectly ordinary manner to all interested parties.
David Greer helped get the deal done, and we'll hear more about Greer later. And at first, the fans were happy, and it didn't hurt that Rangers won the league.
I wanted to give the guy a chance because he's on paper or in the newspapers. He seemed to have like the right credentials.
Fans care about trophies, but what was on Craig Whyte's mind? Remember, he had a history of asset stripping. Did he intend to take this business model to Ibrox? Behind the scenes, some clues were emerging and would lead me all the way to Surrey to investigate the curious case of the missing £250,000. This is the home of non-league minnows Banstead Athletic. It could hardly be further from the atmosphere and glamour of Ibrox Stadium. But apparently, Craig Whyte had decided to give this tiny amateur club £250,000 from the Rangers client account. The only problem is that people at the club don't appear to know anything about it. The chairman of Banstead has told the BBC that he's never seen the cash and nor does he expect to. And with attendances here sometimes struggling to get into the teens, they could certainly do with the money. So what was that cash really for, and where did it end up?